Hey folks, I'm going to give a few more minutes for people to join and we'll start a little after 4 at 4 o'clock. Sheriff Van Arsdal, have you had a chance to introduce yourself to the Hope Advisory Board yet?
Of course, I'm working on this little laptop when you asked me to turn my camera on and talk. I have not, but I think I've met in one arena or another, everybody. But I certainly can. That'd be great.
Okay, after the public comment, I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you for being here. And we have a couple board members who cannot be here tonight. Barbara and Carol and Nancy, who have let me know ahead of time they can't be here because of personal reasons.
Julie, I'm having some kind of video problem. I'm going to jump off and on again.
Sounds good, Peg. Okay, it's 4:01, so I'll go ahead and start your meeting for you. Hope you all are doing well out there. It's good to see your faces. I'm going to be going back and forth to let people into the meeting and also screen share. I don't see our wonderful note taker Paula here yet. Ah, there she is. Great. I'll give her one more minute. Paula, yay, you are here. How is your audio tonight? I would be lost without Paula taking notes while this meeting happens, because it would be impossible to document all your fantastic conversation and discussion and also help facilitate the meeting. Paula, can you hear me okay? How's your audio? Well, here is hoping. Give me one sec, folks. Okay. Oh, good. Paula can hear just fine. Don't worry about unmuting, Paula. I see your chat. We'll go ahead and start the meeting. Let me screen share for you all so we can see an overview of your meeting today. Let's convene your March 2022 public meeting. Just some housekeeping for folks who are attending as public members or as members of the public. You should be muted, but if you have a public comment, please type into the chat, and I'll also give an opportunity if anybody calls in, although I don't see any folks who called in on a phone. And after I go over the agenda, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. So here is the agenda for your meeting today. You'll approve your meeting minutes. I've got some pretty great updates on staff capacity and legislation. And then we'll go into some sharing from the two work groups that met this past month, the communications work group and the research work group. And then we will elect your co-chairs. and adjourn the meeting. So just to remind folks of the agreements of the culture you want to set for your board. Love to bring this up on the screen. I think it has helped you all have a wonderful culture on the Hope board. Okay, I will go ahead and stop sharing. Oh, if I can figure it out. Give me just a second, folks. There we are. Stop share. Okay, is there anybody who would like to make a public comment today? Thank you, Peggy Lynch. I can see you shaking your head. I see a couple of folks from our community, so want to make sure there's opportunity. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So Sheriff Van Arsdal, would you just introduce yourself for anybody who has not had an opportunity to meet you yet?
Sure, Julie, thank you. My name is Jeff Van Arsdal. I'm the Benton County Sheriff. I've been sheriff now for a year. I participated in these meetings from afar, just kind of paying attention, making sure I know what's going on. Captain Goodwin's here, and Joel and I have worked our entire careers together. And so if I miss something, Captain Goodwin will make sure that I'm up to speed and brought up to speed there. So I just appreciate your time. I appreciate what you do, and I don't want to take any more of your time. I recognize a lot of you. It's good to see folks, and the sheriff's office, second floor, and my door is always open. If you got any recommendations or anything like that, come on down, say hi. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to see you. Okay, I'll go ahead and move on with your meeting. Okay, I sent out your meeting minutes from your, oh, this says January. I apologize. I did not update that, from your February 2022 meeting. I didn't receive any edits from you all. And so could I please have a motion to approve your meeting minutes, and then we will use it as roll call as well.
I motion to approve.
Thank you, Brian. And a second?
Second,
Is that you, George?
that was me.
Okay, thank you. We'll go through, and as I call your name, say present and aye or nay or abstain if you were not at February's meeting. Catherine Bisco.
Present and approved.
Thanks. Carol is not here tonight. She has an excused absence, Paula. Brian Cotter.
I approve.
Thank you. Kate Deloach.
Present, approve.
Thank you. Anita Earl.
Present, abstain.
Thanks. Joel Goodwin.
Present, approve.
George Grosh.
Present and approved.
Ari Grossman Naples. I know you're here, Ari. I can see you. Can you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Present, approve.
There we go. Great. Barbara Hanley has an approved absence this month. Melissa is a foreign. You know what? Melissa has gone for spring break with her family. She has an approved absence as well, and I forgot to note it. I apologize. Bria Lewis. I do not see Bria in the chat. Okay. Cindy Lolick.
Present, approved.
Charles Mon.
Present and approved.
Peggy McGuire.
Present and abstain.
Jim Moorfield.
Present and approved.
Andrea Myrie.
Present and approved.
Jan Napak.
Present and approved.
Chanel Probst. I do not see Chanel in the chat. Okay. Reese Stotzenberg.
I'm present and approved.
Thanks, Reese. Nancy can't be here tonight. Okay, your meeting minutes pass. Thank you, Paula, for taking note of that. So we've got some updates on staff capacity. The county, working in collaboration with the city, want to add capacity to work on implementing your HOPE recommendations. And so the county recruited for 2 different positions, a project manager and also a grant researcher writer. And we had success with the project manager recruitment and position, and Rebecca Taylor has accepted the job as a project manager. She starts next month. She has extensive experience with community development. She's worked with Habitat for Humanity on different construction projects. And she has a lot of relationships in this community, so hopefully she can hit the ground running pretty well. There was not success with the researcher writer for grants posting. There weren't any applications, so the county is going to look at how do we contract out for that work. Any questions about that? Okay. Next, legislation. So this was a banner year for legislation. I don't think anybody in homelessness and housing and affordable development has seen this kind of investment, maybe ever. And so there are quite a few different bills. I'm going to just summarize a couple of them so that folks are in the know. Last year, there was a bill allowing flexibility for siting of shelters for folks experiencing homelessness. And a bill this year has extended that for 1 more year until next July 2023. There was also a task force created last year to look at racial disparities in homelessness, and that task force has been extended until 2025. And another bill this year has $100 million for behavioral health housing. Our behavioral health director, Danielle, was just thrilled to hear about this. It likely will go to county mental health to be able to invest in housing for people with behavioral health issues. Okay. The really big bill, the huge $400 million package hasn't been signed yet, but it likely will be signed. And I included a link to the Housing Alliance's breakdown of what is in this bill, because they go into a ton of detail and you can find it on their website. And so I'm just going to touch upon some of the highlights, a lot on prevention, a lot on services, and a lot on coordination. And so prevention investments at 30 million, services at 50 million, having an interagency council on homelessness at the state level. And Peggy, I think I remember you saying that this used to exist and then it dispersed and now they're bringing it back again. And looking at Built for Zero and how do we invest in that in more places around Oregon. So locally, some legislation passed. No, it is awaiting governor's signature. I apologize, but it passed both houses. The city and county homeless service pilots and the city of Corvallis and Benton County are one of 8 pilot areas in the state of Oregon that would get funding to work on a coordinated homeless response office, really staffing at the city and county level to coordinate and work on homelessness solutions in partnership with our provider partners. And then there was lots of money for trash cleanup and some earmarked specifically for Corvallis. I think it was about $250,000 to target mitigation and trash from camping. So there is a Benton County Crisis Center update. The county's crisis center is moving forward with a downtown location. The Board of Commissioners made that decision yesterday. And there's a couple of different funding sources that have already been earmarked for this crisis center. Some from Rep. Rayfield, some from Congressman DeFazio, and some from a bill that's yet to be signed, but likely will be signed, bringing together quite a few funds to build a crisis center in Benton County. A Corvallis update, the Housing Operational Committee, that's a committee for the city of Corvallis, is recommending to Corvallis City Council to fund the development of 60 units of affordable housing. And council is going to vote on that at their April 4th meeting. And then the second update, Andrea, I don't want to steal your thunder on this one. Can you share this update? Because it's really credit to you and Unity Shelter.
We were able to purchase a new property, a fourplex, with the help of the city of Corvallis and our donors. And we have folks moving into that housing site last week and this week. And it's folks that are qualified for permanent supportive housing. So people that have been chronically homeless, experience a disability, and are otherwise vulnerable.
Thank you. And Unity Shelter helped with those referrals too. One from the women's shelter, two from the Safe Place program with micro shelters, and one person living unsheltered. Great job. Okay, any questions? I will stop sharing for a second to see if there's any questions about that update or anything I missed. Is there something that's happened since your last month's meeting that's a big update in your world that I didn't capture here? Okay. Well, thanks, folks. Go ahead and screen share again. Move on to your work group presentations. So you have all decided that your role at this juncture has twofold and had two work groups created that met in the past month, and I helped facilitate those discussions. And the first one is really a communication role. How do we better communicate progress, updates, what's going on the topic of homelessness and housing? And the second one is researching best practices on successful systems that correspond to the different 12 recommendations that you've done and are timely for the work being done by city, county, CSC, and many providers. So the first work group looked at communications and really asking themselves two questions. Where and how should communication updates be sent out? Where do people get their information? And then a second question, what content should be communicated? And Kaylee Olson, the communications coordinator for our health department, joined this work group to brainstorm on these issues. So I will hand it over to Catherine. Hopefully you are still here, Catherine, and you can share the first two slides.
Super, thanks, Julie. First, we're excited to have Kaylee Olson on board, and that was a very notable addition to our team with this work group. One of the things that was talked about at the beginning of the Hope work was a side conversation, one of those to-dos, maybe laters. It wasn't the first priority, but was that communication piece. And I just want to express my appreciation to this group also, because the work that we've done have allowed those funds to happen. Our legislators have recognized the need, but also the work that the Hope Advisory Board has done over the last year has really illustrated that we're set to put some money behind our recommendations with our partnership with the county and the city. And to that end comes a conversation of communication, which is how do we tell our community all the great things that are actually happening here. It's kind of like a foundation for a house. We've done a lot of work. You're not necessarily seeing the house yet because we haven't stood up the walls, and we're getting to that point. So one of the things we focused on with this group is how do we do that communication on a broader level, including the rural areas of Kings Valley, Philomath, Monroe, our unincorporated areas of LC, of course, Adair Village. And some of the topics we came up with were ideas of how do we do press releases to share community updates and where there are more resourcing. So press releases that may be able to point back to web pages or connect with links to social media. We have some great things happening with Gazette Times, and welcome to Cody Mann to that team as well. And the Corvallis Advocate has always been a great partner with the Hope Advisory Board as well, and really illustrating some of the work and actually having I would say a large part in how we got to this point, bringing this group together. Social media is that place where you either like it or you don't like it, but the fact is many people get their information from that source, and is that a place where we can improve communications and highlight the things that are happening. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter were all considered, and how to communicate and network those together and bring those back to county and city discussions. Facebook pages for Corvallis Police Department, Benton County Sheriffs. How do we network and communicate with all of those? Albany Police Department as well. And yes, they have a great following on their Facebook page. So how do we partner with those? How do we hashtag and network those together? Really, it's just a matter of raising the awareness of what Hope is doing. So where do we get our information in rural Benton County? Some of the specific ideas that were discussed were the Philomath News, which is an online news source that replaced the former Philomath newspaper that we had through the Corvallis Gazette-Times. Philomath community has 1 or 2 Facebook pages, some of them private, but some more externally facing as well. Kings Valley has a community trust website and as well a couple Facebook pages. So Kings Valley Happenings and Kings Valley Buy and Sell Facebook pages. The city of Philomath has a relatively active Facebook page. Our Town Monroe is another Facebook page, and the Mayor of Monroe as well. And then private LC Facebook groups. So these again are those other alternatives that maybe don't rise to the top of our first communications, but are definitely resources to get to our rural areas.
Thank you, Catherine. I forgot to mention to the rest of the Hope Board members, as Catherine and the rest of the group go through their ideas, if it jogs something in your memory that you see needs to be included and it's not on here, please make note of it, because we're going to have a discussion after they share their ideas so that you can add your own ideas to this as well. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Ari.
Hi, yeah, continuing on in the area of where do we get our information from, we discussed different email lists for organizations within the community, county and city official lists, including ALSI and other areas, Corvallis Sustainability Coalition, neighborhood associations, Lynn Benton Health Equity Alliance, Lynn Benton Hispanic Advisory Council, Casa Latinos and Amigos de Monroe, school districts, the NAACP, churches, faith community, Rotary and Elks, businesses, Chamber of Commerce, Visit Corvallis, Economic Development Office, Corvallis Multicultural Literacy Center, and all of these sorts of outlets or organizations where we can tap into their networks as well and kind of get that information pushed out there in many directions.
And you know what, I forgot to mention, Joel shared with me a great list that CPD has that I used for community engagement with all of your Hope efforts last year. And it had like the Bicycle Collective and a lot of different groups. And so that would be something, I've already shared it with Kaylee to share ideas about the different kind of lists where we can share information with the leader of, the Corvallis Sustainability Coalition, and then they send it out to all of their members. Sorry, Ari, to chime in.
And we also discussed other hubs in terms of communication. Nextdoor, which is a neighborhood kind of listserv for different neighborhoods around the county. People can push them out through maybe board members who belong to them or other folks who belong to them can put those that information out on those listservs. Community Services Consortium, I'm sure they have a great network of way to get communication out as well. Probably newsletters and things like that. Oregon State University, getting things out through their system. And LBCC, Lynn Benton Community College as well. Those are great organizations that will have lots of opportunities to put communications out there.
Thank you, Ari. Okay, I think Nancy was going to go next. So I'm going to jump in and help with her slides. This group also talked about how do we share in person with print materials, because there's lots of folks who aren't on social media or maybe aren't on any email lists. And so different events like City Speak that used to happen in person, hopefully it does again. And then locations out in the community. And Cade, I saw that you put in rural areas, bulletin boards at rural post offices. So that's a great one to add there. But community partner organization locations, especially locations where folks are experiencing homelessness and accessing services or food or shelter. The farmers market and the library is a real hub for in-person access to information. And then pivoting on to what content should be communicated. Really wanting to prioritize what is the progress on implementing the HOPE recommendations and sharing that with the community, because it touches upon your 12 recommendations touch upon so many different areas of the housing and homelessness services spectrum. And then being sure to communicate with reciprocity for our community partners that all were listed, getting their message out and having them get our message out with different kinds of hashtags. Updates from adjacent counties, things that have been added in Lynn or Lincoln or north or south of here. And then legislative updates from state laws, kind of like the ones I just shared with you at the beginning of the meeting. This is how your government serves you. Okay, I think I'm going to pass it over to George. Go for it.
No, thank you. Along with all of this, we talked about content that should be communicated, talking about how we could use this as a tool to dispel myths in the community. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstanding about not only what it is to be homeless in this community or in any community, but also what's going on, what can be done to solve it. It looks like an intractable problem, something that can't be resolved, but what we're finding is there are tools that we can use as communities to end these tools. So use this as a way to be able to challenge myths that are out there, that doing the work that we're doing will attract more homeless people, that will make Corvallis and Benton County a hub for homelessness for people to come here. How do we, we know that's not true. And so how do we get that information out there? And use this data to build support for recognizing this is a problem that we can do something about. Can you go to the next slide, Julie? And then storytelling. There's a lot of wonderful stories here, and people don't hear them. We just hear in the last couple of meetings, when you think about the data that we've been looking at, the numbers of people that are homeless, and then we hear from the providers about the stories of people that have been successfully navigating this hugely complex system and having positive outcomes. We're seeing people transitioning from homelessness to micro shelters to permanent housing. We're seeing an increase in the number of housing units that are available, but getting people's stories out there so that people understand these are human beings that we're dealing with here. They have important stories to tell, and the stories are relatable to all of us. And again, use it as a tool to begin to build overall support, not for looking at homelessness as a problem, but looking as an opportunity for us to resolve it, to actually do something to make a difference.
Thanks, George. I think that was your last slide. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing because there were some great ideas in the chat. Kate, did you want to elaborate at all about any ideas from a rural perspective of in-person or other methods? And Kate, maybe you can't chime in right now, and that is fine. And Cindy, thanks. The co-op, of course, the co-op is a hub for information. Other thoughts, anything that this group didn't touch upon? Kaylee is here with us tonight to hear any feedback you have about what avenues for communicating, whether it's virtual, email, print, in person, or the content to communicate. Thoughts from you all? I mean, this group did a great job. There's not a lot to add. Catherine, did you want to add? You were in this group. Did you forget?
I was in this group, but I do. So Councillor Dan Napak just put in a really good chat item, and I know this is a space. It was about getting information to elected officials. I feel like we've done a pretty reasonable job of that, but I would say that to our other elected officials, so Adair Village, Philomath, Monroe, Albany also. So while they are not fully, all of Albany is not fully in Benton County, I know there's been some outreach behind the scenes in getting some resourcing and some partnerships going on in that space. So if there's a press release that we can direct specifically to those electeds, that might be beneficial as well. And county commissioners too. I think peripherally we see the information, but don't always have the data and the facts in front of us.
Thanks, Catherine. And I remember your group discussing that. I'm sorry that I didn't capture it on the slide or in the notes. But you talked about the different elected officials all over the county at the city and county level. Jim, go ahead.
Something I talked about a long time ago, but I'm reminded of now, is the research and practice that's been going on the last 10 or 15 years in how to message about affordable housing. And I think those lessons, even though the affordable housing messages aren't specific to homelessness, the messages still apply. And I'll forward some materials that I've gathered to Julie, but it may be useful for the group. There's one in particular. An example is Enterprise Communities produced a report a number of years ago called "You Don't Have to Live Here: Why Housing Messages Are Backfiring and 10 Things You Can Do About It," which is another way. What they talk about in this particular piece is that sometimes the way we talk about these things actually has the opposite impact than we intend. And so then there's another piece that I'll also forward that says, well, this is what messaging that doesn't backfire looks like. And it's really, really useful stuff.
Well, and Jim, I remember we went to a NIMBY training over at the Sunset Building, but I can't remember who hosted it. Was it Dev Northwest?
Well, the Dev Northwest and the Health Equity Alliance that they manage have done trainings on messaging. Yeah. So it might have been,
Okay.
Probably was. Yeah.
Thank you. Please do share those with me, and I can send them out to the board and also Kaylee. Any other thoughts from folks on communication avenues or content? Jan?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody realizes that everybody in the county is a stakeholder, and that is why we're doing this. Well, one of the reasons why we're doing this.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Other thoughts? Anita, can I put you on the spot and say, are there any healthcare communication outlets that we didn't capture here? You have that inside Samaritan perspective.
There are a couple of communication tools that Samaritan uses, like the Heart to Heart magazine, and there have been several write-ups recently about the medical respite beds that we are continuing to build for the unhoused and utilize, and lots of heartwarming stories for sure, as was previously mentioned or needed, have been written up. And the backpacks program, which I don't know if I shared with this group, but we have, oh gosh, it must be about 75 backpacks dispersed throughout the Samaritan Healthcare System's emergency department for the unhoused. And they have things like electrolyte mix, blankets, protein powders. They're fairly environmentally sound backpacks. And then we also petitioned a couple of local schools, and the kids wrote beautiful letters about, we got you, you're going to make it, darling drawings from 4th grade classes that we included in the backpacks. And those programs have been written up in Samaritan articles, and I'm certainly would be happy to further those efforts with any information we have. And I was actually going to chime in that I met with Marilyn Smith from the city of Albany last week, and their heart committee, they're attempting to deal with the unhoused too. Would love to hear more from us, and I'd be happy to be that segue person, and have already promised her some more conversations. So
thanks, Anita. Yeah, I get the heart updates from Emily in Peggy's shop. They do great job communicating. Cade, I see that you are back, and you put something in the chat about rural post offices. And I know you've lived in 2 different rural areas in Benton County now. Did you want to elaborate any more on in-person or other kinds of ways to communicate in those areas?
Yeah, the post office came to mind. I live out in Summit now, but I lived in Monroe for about 5 years up until recently, and had a post office box. And I noticed like the fire department and the school district would do a lot of postings there, and it was just a lot of people pass in and out of, or they're kind of a central location for the rural communities. So I know it's a little like analog or whatever, but I think if you did want more in person, opportunities to disseminate the information, that could be good for rural. Like there's a Philomath post office too, Monroe. But yeah.
Thank you. And one that I don't know if we put on the list, but outside of Corvallis, the main providers are food banks. And there are food access areas in so many different rural parts of Benton County that if there is a printed newsletter or even a postcard with a QR code for a link to more information, being sure to coordinate with all the food providers and Lynn Benton Food Share and Matt Gillespie, who is tied into all the different food networks. George.
I believe we left food stores off the list too. You think about LC, the grocery in the LC market is a community center. I mean, everybody goes there. The LC Health Center, the Dairy Mart in Monroe. I mean, it's just places where people gather. And there's bulletin boards in all those places.
Thanks, George.
I was just gonna say the Monroe Library in case it hasn't been brought up, but yeah.
Okay, so any library, and obviously not just Corvallis, but the libraries in Benton County.
Well, and they're all part of the Corvallis library system. So, just making a connection with them to make sure the information gets out.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. Any other thoughts on this topic? Great ideas, everyone. I want to manage expectations of what half of one person's time can do. And Kaylee's also training her replacement and going to other trainings and having to communicate all the health department stuff internally and externally. But half of her time can go to this. So all of these ideas will help shape what she works on. And Suzanne Hoffman, the health department director, ultimately determines her work product. But all of this information is fantastic feedback to help guide her efforts. Was there anything else you wanted to chime in on, Kaylee?
No, just thank you, everybody. These are great ideas. I love hearing everyone's feedback, and you all have such vast experience in a variety of areas. So it's really exciting to hear not only my own perspective, but a really wide variety that has been doing this work for a long time. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kaylee. Also, yeah, the Gleaners in Philomath or Philomath Community Services, and then Strengthening Rural Families. They are all over the county. They have a physical location in Philomath, but they do work in a bunch of different areas all over Benton County. So good thinking, Andrea. Okay, well, we can wrap up this discussion. If you have other ideas on this topic, please email them to me and I can share them with Kaylee. Okay. And we'll go ahead. Oh, quite a few Gleaner groups around the county. Thank you for that, Peggy. Your next work group has a couple of folks out today because of personal reasons. So I can chime in. And Andrea, I'm going to lean on you a bit to share some of this. And then Jan, I might make you share a couple slides too. But this work group was really grappling with how do they do research that can help inform existing implementation efforts. So city and county and CSC and provider partners are working on expanding capacity, improving data, moving towards a coordinated entry data system. And so can the Hope Board do some research and share it with our city, county staff that might help some of these efforts? So, oh, well, there we go. A couple of examples of the Hope recommendations and how they might be helped by some research from the Hope Board. Okay. Andrea, did you want to jump in on this one?
So some of the topics that we talked about, which was, based off of the proposal that Jim had sent us last month, Jim Moorfield. We talked about, how oftentimes we talk about all the work that we need to do, but that we lack the organizational capacity to provide the types of programming and shelter housing services to get people out of homelessness. And then what are the best ways to help support that capacity without sort of dictating to organizations how they need to grow. And then also, what kind of financial support system do we need to get to the point where we can actually really make a huge impact on homelessness and get to that point of it being a rare occurrence in our community. And then this is one of my favorite topics these days, which is coordinated entry. So there's a difference between data input into the coordinated entry system and actually having a coordinated entry system, because you need the housing and services to go along with making those referrals that, from that database and from the data that you're collecting from people. Other communities have an actual handbook that they have that they distribute to the coordinated entry participants that talks about how to enter in data, which programs to make referrals to, how to make those referrals, how to make decisions about referrals. So that's something that we need to learn more about. And then, did you want me to talk about the next one too?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so then also there, you know, as Julie suggested in an earlier slide, with the state's interest in Built for Zero, there's a nationwide movement to try to really take, you know, we have all these priority areas, and we know we have all these things to work on, but really what those areas culminate in is being able to build a system so that homelessness is a rare occurrence. So there's some evidence, or there's some experience and some strategies around building a solid system to make this a rare occurrence. And so finding out more about what that might look like for us without kind of muddying the waters of the work that we've done so far, but as a way of really testing out some of the priority areas that we've picked as a HOPE committee. And being able to build out that capacity by trying something out like Built for Zero. And then also researching more models of funding. We still don't have a good way of funding, for example, case management services, or maybe utilizing Medicaid funding and other funding for harm reduction or for housing services, housing support services. And then also supporting or trying to figure out, you know, maybe as a community, instead of relying on the federal government or the state government to provide rent support for filling the gap between when someone is homeless and has the access to a voucher, figuring out what, if we as a community, or if there's another source of funding to provide some of that gap filling rent support. And then also housing first. I mean, low barrier housing first oriented programs is still a challenge for us as a community, I think, because it takes a great deal of capacity and linkages to services and strong response, you know, to behavioral health, to crisis, to being able to really deal with issues as they come up when people get into housing, so they don't lose that opportunity to stay in housing. So that's the best I can remember.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, these were all great ideas. And, you know, actually, I'm going to go back one slide because Peggy and I just attended IHN's sustainability work group. That's an offshoot of their DST, Delivery Systems Transformation work group. And they really want to look at sustainable models of funding traditional health workers, is what they call them, but people who are out in the community. And so it might make sense to, instead of having the HOPE board look at successful models of funding, really utilize the sustainability work group that IHN is convening to have them, they're coming up with this traditional health worker handbook and orientation and how do you fund it. And so that one might make sense for IHN to work on. And so it leads into the next slide, and Melissa Zavorin was going to present this, but her family's gone for the spring break. But there's a possibility as a community for collaboration on research instead of any kind of duplication of efforts. Intercommunity Health Research Institute. So it's going to be IHN's Research Institute. They're planning to collaborate with OSU's Research Institute, really. It's OPAL, OSU's Policy Analysis Lab, on research about solutions to homelessness. And OPAL, I mean, their kind of capacity to do research that is fantastic and high level and has quite a few people working on it is wonderful. So would it make sense as a community to plug into that effort and help to inform it based on the priorities and the HOPE recommendations? That's just something to have you all discuss. What would it make sense to have the HOPE board research or this work group research, and then where would it make sense to plug into existing efforts that have a huge amount of capacity like OPAL? So I'll go ahead and just share, share these ideas. So here's the first slide: building organizational capacity. How can the city and county support providers in growing capacity if they want to, in ways that align with their missions? Financial support, coordinated entry successes, researching Built for Zero, going to skip that second bullet. Models or sources for rent support for gaps between being unsheltered and getting a spot in PSH or a voucher. Housing first as a policy. And I will go ahead and stop sharing to let you all give feedback on that. Where's your passion? Where's your energy? Where do you think it's most timely to put this work group's efforts on research? I know that's a lot. George, go for it.
Jim hit it on it earlier, but I think this is a good opportunity to say, you know, what are messages that work in this community? That's we're taking a pretty broad shotgun approach and saying let's get a lot of different messages out there. But how would we know which ones are working and which ones aren't working? And and also we could do research on, well, I think the strategies part of it, what strategies are supported in this community. But I'm interested in what messages work in this community and how do you present those messages? How do you present those messages?
Thanks, George. Jan.
Yeah, I would like, I see where we've got a very good base in technology with OSU and with OPAL and the intercommunity health research. They have that capability of using their, I guess you could say their skill set. And whatever they do, I think if it can translate, whatever they do, I think it needs to translate down to, boots on the ground, our agencies, and I would consider our agencies their customers in some sense of the word. And I would make sure that, well, besides a clientele, but to make sure that whatever they come up with is very approachable.
Thanks, Jan. And I know that Melissa Zavorin is going to be overseeing this collaboration between IHN's Research Institute and OPAL's work. And I think what I heard you say, it makes sense to tie into that effort and make sure that anything that comes out of it is just understood by the general community in layman's terms and isn't some very high level publication. Charles, no problem. If you need to sign off and come back on, no problem. I think it also might make sense, in addition to Melissa, to maybe have someone else from the Hope Board be something of a representative on this OPAL IHN collaboration, just to make sure that the recommendations are at the forefront and working on homelessness research and solutions that are already a priority in this community from the provider perspective and from the city and county perspective. Jim, yeah?
Well, I think you actually just said something that I was going to, or at least partly what I was just going to point to. I don't know I'd have to understand better the scale of what IHN and OPAL want to do or what they're thinking of before I know how to differentiate that or complement that with the work that we're doing. But it does seem like there's lots of opportunity there, to say the least. And I would also say that when people that have never worked in housing and homelessness decide that they want to research the problem, there's a tendency to think that other communities haven't done this already, or that there's not a lot of information out there. And the opposite is true. A lot of communities have done this already, and there's a lot of information out there. We just had never had someone like you, Julie, to help kind of pull things together in such a way that we are looking at all that in a coherent fashion. So I guess my message is don't recreate the wheel here. These efforts should put significant time into consulting with people who are already expert in the field. And we have some in Oregon. Yeah, so we should focus on not duplicating work that's been done in the past, but building on work that's already happened all around the country.
Well, and from what I could tell from what Melissa shared, this collaboration is going to kick off at some point this year. And so there's a lot of opportunity to even shape what it would look like and shape the research questions. And I think a lot of that homelessness and housing knowledge is here on the board and could help chime in and guide their efforts.
Yeah,
Peggy,
so I guess I would close by saying, I hope we have an opportunity as a full board, but certainly the research committee to chime in on that as it's getting formed, not after the fact.
yeah, Peggy and then Andrea and then George.
So I was also thinking about the work that Opal is doing for us with the, figuring out ways to have a statistically significant sampling of the homeless population to give us some better measurements of the actual homeless population, and that we should really reach out to them and say, hey, and any of these projects that you're doing with so many other groups or entities, we really hope that you will keep this in mind and begin to kind of feed this information to us as you develop it.
Thanks, Peggy. Yeah, of course. Opal's already collaborating with the Rural Oregon Continuum of Care to work on data improvements for the point in time count. Yeah. Andrea.
I think that, there's 2 points I want to make. First of all, sometimes, and this is what I brought up in the research group, sometimes attempting a small project to see how things might work, to run an experiment might be a good idea, especially when we're talking about coordinated entry serving a specific type of population. It might be something that we could research and make a recommendation to, and to providers and to people working on these issues in the community. The second thing is it might be really useful to have someone come and talk about specifically how they've implemented Built for Zero. And this is something the research committee can make a connection on. How is a community a similar size to ours, with similar issues, implemented Built for Zero? How have they implemented coordinated entry, so that we all have a chance to understand what that really looks like, and then also for us to kind of poke holes at that and say, and ask questions specific to, like, well, how might that work for us, or how does that relate to some of the challenges that we're seeing?
So I have done some groundwork on this to reach out to my colleagues in Lane County because they do have a coordinated entry system there. And I've connected with the guy who really helps train providers and frontline staff and convene them to talk about issues on coordinated entry and help get over them. And they also opted into Built for Zero. So Lane County is now working as a Built for Zero cohort. And so James is the name of this colleague down in Lane County. He is willing to come and do a presentation to the H.O.P.E board as an educational component on what is coordinated entry, how does it work when it is done successfully, and what kind of staff does it take to stand it up, and the kind of timeline. I think it took them about a year. So like, what's a realistic expectation of training providers? So I do think that's something that the research committee or the research work group can even dig down a little further on. And James is also connecting me with their contacts at Built for Zero to try to make a connection there to get some more information. Thanks, Andrea. George, you had raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks. I'm kind of addressing what Peggy and Andrea talked about a little bit. There's a number of different providers here that are providing lots of different services. I'm wondering from them, and if we have a moment, or if anybody had a comment, is there anything that you've seen from the research piece that says, I'd really like to know this? Do the people that are guests here that are providers have any ideas that might fit into this category of information that could help them in lots of ways, or could help, inform what they do in going into the future? That was it.
Well, Andrea is one of the key providers on our board. I don't want to put folks like Sean and Ben on the spot if they're just attending and wanting to listen in.
If they wanted to make a comment, I'm not putting them on the spot. If they had a comment, to make, please, this I'm all open to hearing it.
Okay, it sounds like Sean or Ben, if you would like to chime in on this and provide any provider perspective, on what you'd be interested in having some research from this board on. Okay, no problem. Jim, you raised your hand.
There was something that Peggy said about understanding the scale of the problem better, that I really think is an important point. I hope that before I'm done having influence with the Hope Board and our elected officials, that we end up that one of the products of our work is actually setting a 5-year goal for how many people we're going to help transition out of homelessness. I think it's really important to have, I think that's really important to have a plan that actually sets goals. But I think in setting a good goal, not only is it a matter of supportive services and affordable housing and so on, there should be some relationship to the resources we devote and how many homeless people there are. I know we have the point in time count, but that's a snapshot in one day in the year. I know the League of Women Voters did a study that's on the H.O.P.E board page in the Benton County website, that where the League of Women Voters made a really strong attempt at pulling together multiple sources of information in order to come up with a number that was more like how many people are homeless over the course of a year in Benton County. And so, so I think there's opportunity to kind of get a little more nuanced about the nature of the homeless population. You know, not just the individuals we see in streets in tents and on the street, but also, you know, families that are doubling up in homes or in cars or in shelters. Young people, of course, the school district puts out annual information about the number of homeless youth, and just pull all these different sources together so we can say at some point, okay, this is what our aspiration is. We're going to, I'll make up a number, we are going to design a system and fund a system that's capable of helping 350 households over the next 5 years transition out of homelessness. And you know, I think we need to know when what we're doing is working, and we need to know the scale of the problem better than we do today.
Jim, I want to just add something on to that. The pilot legislation at the state that would give funding to 8 different areas, including ours, part of that legislation requires that once that staff capacity is added for a coordinated homeless response office, part of their deliverable is a 5-year strategic plan. What kind of goals and how to fund things, and giving that feedback to the legislature of what is needed to fund this, and looking and being able to talk with the other pilot areas of how are you doing your strategic plan? We don't have to do these in silos. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Excellent. Yeah.
Yes. Ben, I want to make sure to circle back to you. You put something in the chat, but would you like to share it verbally?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I did just put it in the chat, and I don't have much else to add besides that. But one of the issues that I've noticed with the coordinated entry systems that we've kind of been dipping our feet into the water about is that really they're designed to help the people who are the most vulnerable populations. And unfortunately, a lot of the services that they need are really things that many of our providers can't provide. They're at a level that's much more acute than what we can really serve within the city. However, I still think that a coordinated entry system is really important. And just how do we kind of expand that to be able to help? As Jim said, there are so many people who are vulnerable to homelessness who we don't see, the folks who are kind of the invisible homeless, who are doubled up or, you know, living in substandard situations. So I appreciated what Jim just said. And then also, I think going back to the hub model, or the action table, I think is what we're calling it these days.
Situation. It's the situation table.
The situation table. sounds like something that would be in an old comic or something. Anyway, I love the name. But I think that also is something that I'm really interested in continuing to learn about, and I think it would be valuable for the community to implement it. So thank you for the opportunity to chime in, and I'm sorry I didn't get unmuted when you asked the first time.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Ben. And given that I have a connection now in Lane County that is interested in coming up to share successes with coordinated entry, it might be possible at the April meeting if the executive committee decides to put that on the agenda for your next meeting. Did I miss any folks who wanted to chime in on this discussion of research? Okay. Well, I heard a lot of consensus with the different topics that the research work group came up with. They're meeting again next month to chew on this feedback and hopefully get a bit more information from Melissa at IHN about the plans for partnering with Opal on research so we can report back next month. Okay, let me go ahead and screen share and go to the end. So co-chairs, roles and responsibilities. I am really disappointed. Bria is not here tonight. Somebody is unmuted. Who is unmuted? Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry about the feedback, folks. But I've reviewed the co-chairs roles and responsibilities with you all. There were a couple people who were interested, but one of them is not here tonight. The other one is, thankfully. So I will go ahead and stop screen sharing. We were going to give an opportunity to George and to Bria to talk about why they are interested in the co-chair position. And then there needs to be a formal vote from all the Hope board members here today to elect them as co-chairs, and then they would serve on the executive committee. But it sounds like it'll just be George tonight. George, I hate to put you on the spot, but you are so eloquent. So feel free to share what you'd like for the next minute or so.
You know, people here know me and have seen me on the board. I'm really familiar with how these processes work. I'm really engaged with this process and care about what happens, and just feel that I'm willing to help coordinate what goes on and just help make the wheels turn a little more efficiently. And so I have the time and interest, and it's what I do. So I'm happy to serve if you're willing to elect me.
Thank you, George. And if there are other folks on the board who are interested in being a co-chair, it would mean serving on the executive committee, and you help decide the agenda for the meetings going forward. You really help steer the work of the Hope Advisory Board and its future progress. But if it's not tonight, then maybe it'll be at next month's meeting. So I need a motion from one of you to nominate George as co-chair.
So moved.
Thank you, Jim. Is there a second? Was that Cindy? Thank you, Cindy. So I think most of our board members can share their screens. Can I ask Ari and Catherine, Anita and Brian, Reese, if you're able to share your screen, and you can do a thumbs up. Otherwise, I'll have folks chime in with a verbal aye or nay. Okay, I'm seeing Brian, aye. All those in favor of electing George as one of the co-chairs, I am seeing all ayes. Joel Goodwin,
Aye
thank you.
Reese.
Thank you, Reese. From Catherine, I'm going to assume that's your thumbs up. Anita, thank you. Well, Harvey, we'll take your thumbs up too. Jan, okay, thank you. George is elected as one of your co-chairs and will serve on the executive committee. And if there are other folks who are interested, we can get to that at next month's meeting. Thanks, George. Congrats. Look forward to working with you on the exec committee.
I want to add one thing about George. I've known George for, I don't know, like 30 years or something. And everything he said about himself is true.
Well, thank you, Jim. All right, I think we only have a little bit of wrap up to do. So the research work group will continue. The communications group will meet when it's timely to give feedback to Julie and Kaylee, myself and Kaylee. I can't believe I just read my own name. Once Kaylee has some type of communication to share. And then I'm going to look at different educational topics for your upcoming meetings, coordinated entry being a top priority, and then street outreach and response team experiences, practices, and protocols. Housing first, what is it? Give a definition and policy examples and practice. And IHN CCO, what work and investments are they doing to target homelessness or population health, community-wide health that goes beyond just their IHN members, because that's part of what they do as a CCO. So I'll stop sharing. We only took an hour tonight, y'all. That's amazing. It's because there was no educational component. None of the folks that I reached out to were able to respond and present tonight this quickly. But are there any other issues you all would like to discuss or that we need to touch upon today? And executive committee, I'm looking at you. Is there anything that you discussed that we forgot that you wanted to share with the board? Nope. Okay. Oh, George, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been talked about, but I think we're fast approaching a time when in-person meetings are in order, and I'm interested in where we stand on that or what people's thoughts are about that. And also if we have the capacity to do in-person and streaming at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, George. I polled you all, and it was across the board. There were folks who were really excited about in person, folks who were so thankful to have it be virtual because they have kids or they live more remotely. And then people who were glad to have it be both ways. And so Kaylee and I are going to investigate the Sunset Main meeting room probably sometime in the next couple of weeks. Kaylee, did you want to chime in on that at all? No, okay.
No, I just heard my name. But also, Sam, just so everyone knows, we recently hired a new health department administrative specialist who took over my former administrative role now that I've moved to communication. So Sam may be able to help us with that too, Julie.
Okay, great. Because I know there were lots of IT investments for that room, for microphones and video, but really wanting to make sure that if it is a hybrid meeting where folks are there in person and folks are tuning in via Zoom, that there is no difference in experience or able to participate. And Jim, you brought up that of making sure that there's no sort of disparity in access to the meeting and participation and talking. So Kaylee and I are going to investigate that and report back to you next month. Sound good, George? Okay. Well, thank you all. We had a short meeting tonight, but lots of great discussion for the work groups to take back. And I will see you all in a month, if not sooner. We'll go ahead and end your March meeting. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all. Glad to have you back, Peggy. And Paula, have you gotten everything you need from the chat? Okay, great. I will go ahead and close it out then. Good to see you, Paula. Bye.